Hello, and welcome to the Game Developers Refuge podcast for Saturday, June 7th, 2008. This is episode 9. I'm your host, Jay, and today I'd like to introduce Mike.
Hi there.
And Kate.
Hi.
All right. And we're back. Now, the topic of discussion is Python. Mike's going to lead us off with this one because he is sort of the resident Python guy on the boards. So, Mike, first question that I would like answered is, why are you using Python instead of some other language?
I guess I'm still coding Python because I think it's a pretty intuitive, friendly language to use.
It's intuitive? What are you talking about? There's
Hey, you
line
got such
breaks.
a bad voice to be talking to me with.
I'm sorry, but the idea that Python is intuitive...
You left-wing fascist.
I'm not a... What does that have to do with anything? We're talking about Python.
We're playing...
Bill O'Reilly game. We're playing Python. We're playing the benefits of Python. And I think... And you are totally wrong. You're totally off about Python being easy to use because it's nothing like the other scripting languages where you have semicolon line breaks or each new line is a new line. You have these stupid indents that make absolutely no sense. And
why doesn't it make sense?
Because you can't, for example, okay, remember right now, we're in Game Developers Refuge, we are doing the code block challenge. And may I remind you that you could not do it in Python because you couldn't set up the semicolons needed or end line breaks needed to be able to fit your code into the set amount of lines needed.
Hold on. All right. Seems to be the most common complaint I see on the board. You know, I'm afraid of the indentations, I'm afraid of the spaces and the tabs, I'm afraid something will mess up, and I'll have a problem with my game or my code, it'll crash, and I won't have any idea where the problem is because it'll all look like white space. I'm going to tell you, I am no master coder. I really am not. But I've never, ever, and I even used Linux, which is bound to give you problems.
Did you just call it Linux?
He always calls it Linux.
I've never had a problem with white space. Now, I understand if you come from C and C++ and you derive a great amount of pleasure from packing your code in to as little space as possible, if you like to put your if statements all on one line and you think that's just the way it's got to be, well, you know,
this is just a straw man argument. You know that no one likes to do that.
What? I don't know that no one likes to do that. I like to do that sometime.
I know people who like to do it.
You like to put all your code on one line.
Not all your code.
If statements.
Or even if statements. Everyone at least uses one line for the if statement and one line for what comes after. They never put it all on one line. Never.
But now you're being overgeneralistic because some people, like I just said, do that.
Shut up! Shut up!
Anyway.
You have no right to call me overgeneralistic.
All I'm saying is I've never really had a problem. Well, what I was trying to say is...
All right, well, hold on a second.
There are some things Python can't do as far as the form of the code, but really the form of the code doesn't have any impact on the execution of the code. The idea behind the whole indentation thing is the idea to force the coder to construct a code in a way that follows a set rule. They want to make sure that the code, it's meant to enhance the readability and the understandability of the code.
Who needs readability?
People who are going to maintain it.
Being difficult.
It's definitely true. I do Python dev for a job. And every time, like, it's a mix of Python and C, and the fact that Python forces you to indent stuff all the same means that anytime you look at someone else's code, it's going to be in the same structural format that you're used to doing it in. Whereas if I end up going and looking at, the difference between one guy's C code and another guy's C code, one of the guys likes to have his opening curly braces on the same line, and I absolutely hate that. And then the other guy has his curly braces on a new line, and you just got to get used to it. So It's got its pros and cons. It's kind of annoying because if your stuff is indented incorrectly, then your code can execute weird. But, it's got its benefit in that anywhere you're going to look at Python code, you're going to be able to read it because the style is the same. The only thing I'll say in terms of the indenting is if you're using an editor where it's not easy to tell the difference between a tab and a set number of spaces, and it's not a smart editor, or it is a smart editor in that it treats them differently, like, say, VI, for instance, if you put 4 spaces and you put a tab, and the tab happens to be 4 spaces wide, that's going to be different in a different editor. So you can get into trouble if the spacing is off. That's just one gripe I have with it.
It's very easy if you ran into any sort of issue with that. You could just go through the whole document with a search in place and convert every tab to the
spaces.
Number of spaces.
Yep, that you can.
Yeah, the other thing too is that I'm going to be serious now because before I was joking about. Yeah. But being serious, I think you have a really good point about the forcing of the indentation to create a common style between everyone who uses Python. The only problem is that you're being forced to code in a certain style, and some people like the freedom to choose how they develop their code.
But if you don't have the choice in the first place, does it really matter?
Yes.
If you are a person that does like the single line if statements whole the way through, and if you are not happy with the way Python forces you to code, then probably you will want to look for a different language.
Which brings us to languages like Perl. I love Perl, by the way. I think Perl is great.
This is not a discussion about Perl, so I'm going to bring it back to Python.
If you don't like Python, but you want the same benefits of Python, there's always Perl and Ruby and a few others that don't force you to code in a certain style.
Okay, aside from Ruby, what the hell games can you write in Perl that are graphical?
Actually, you know what's written in Perl? Is the bubble game. What's it called? Penguin Pop? No, that's not it. I don't have it installed.
Well, there is a game that has been written with.
Yeah, there's a few games written in Perl. They have SGL and OpenGL.
Oh, wow, I'm surprised. Anyway, so, getting back to Python, we bitched about the white space and shit, but really...
Oh, you get it.
Really, what we want to talk about is making games with the goddamn language. So...
It's just as straightforward as any other language, if not more straightforward.
Is
Obviously,
it really?
It has the Pygame, which uses SDL, and it has the PyOpenGL, which uses OpenGL. So as far as libraries go, your options are not limited at all. And then as far as, designing the game, like I say, the library options are somewhat extensive, and actually there are even others that I just don't happen to use. There's one called Pyglet, which I think might, obviously from the name, Pyglet, probably it's based on GL.
It's just glut, right?
But I haven't used it, but like I say, there's another option out there. And then as far as the actual coding of the game, well, of course, the main detriment is the execution speed, but as long as you're not doing anything too demanding, you're not really going to run into too much of an issue there. You might have to pay more attention to how efficiently you're coding things, because you don't have the same, like if you're coding in C, you might be able to get away with sloppier code because the execution time is so much faster. Whereas in Python, maybe you have to pay attention and make sure you code things tighter. But
here's the thing. Here's the thing that I really like about scripting languages and many of the newer, higher level languages is that when I began programming, I loved C. It's what I knew. Everything I did was in C, and I thought it was great because it gave me such low-level access. But after a few failed projects, you realize the most important thing you need in a programming language is not familiarity, but speed. You need to be able to get things done. You don't have time to worry about pointers. You don't have time to worry about
semicolons,
creating classes that don't already exist. You just need to get things done. And so I would actually encourage anyone, if you've never made a game in a scripting language, be it Python or any of the others, try it. You'll be surprised about how fast you can get stuff done.
Don't use ActionScript as your scripting language.
Why not ActionScript? It's good.
Actually, ActionScript is right. I just don't like the IDE for Flash, the default.
Oh, use Adobe Flex. Adobe Flex uses Eclipse as its IDE, and it uses ActionScript 3.0.
I don't want to get into Eclipse.
All right. Okay, that's a side bit.
It's a side bit, but I just hate Eclipse just because I hate it. I don't want to talk about
Eclipse
that.
Eclipse is slow. Okay.
Eclipse is slow as balls. It's crazy. I can't believe any. I just people that I work with use it, and it's like, dude, I'd rather be using like GVim and tabbing around and typing all this long shit than using Eclipse and doing make on the command line. Forget it. Eclipse is way too slow. But anyway, the one thing I did want to say about Python being awesome is with strings. There's nothing more annoying nothing at all that is more annoying than having to manage your own strings in C by having like character pointers. It's such a pain in the ass to have to allocate that shit and free it and all that stuff. In Python, it's just so easy to just say, foo plus blah ends up becoming foo blah. It is great. That's just it.
I obviously really meant what I said earlier about the intuitiveness of the language. There are things that I have along the way. I would try something just because I thought, well, maybe that's how I should code this, and then it'll work. And then lo and behold, it works. Whereas in other languages like C++ or C or whatever, there's nothing wrong with looking in a book to figure out how something works. And maybe it only saves you a few seconds through intuitivity. But nonetheless, it is kind of nice to be able to, you feel a little bit like you know the language a little bit better. It feels like less of a second language. You don't feel like you have to quite think about it.
Well,
the most confusing thing to me along the way in Python, I think, it didn't take too long for me to straighten it out, is the way it does arrays, or I suppose not so much arrays as they're called lists and tuples. I think of them all as the same. I'm sure there are great technical differences among them. But
between a list and a what?
Tuple.
Tuple.
Oh, triple? Oh, okay.
The thing is, in C you make an array, you just put it in between the square brackets, I think, right?
Yep.
X equals square bracket 1, 2, 3. Well, in Python, you got tuple. I call it a tuple, whatever, Linux tuple. And the tuples are immutable, which is another word I think is really silly. Basically, they're constant. So you could say x equals, open parentheses, 1, 2, 3, with commas in between, close parentheses. And so then you've got 1, 2, 3, and then you could say print x sub 0, and it print 1 on the screen. But then if you tried to go in and say x sub 0 equals 5, then it will error, and it'll say you can't assign to the tuple, or it's immutable, or whatever.
Yep.
And if you define it as x equals square bracket 1, 2, 3, just like you would do in C, then it's a list, and then you can mutate the elements of the list without crashing repercussions.
Yep.
Right. You're absolutely right. The only difference between a tuple and a list is that tuples are constants and lists are editable.
But that's
how big it is. Yeah.
That's exactly where the problem is, because you see how long it took to explain how to do that? In Python, it's just, you just do it.
Right.
It's very easy. But
it's fast. And that's important.
Yeah, it is. But one detriment to that whole thing is that you can have functions that return multiple types, which can get very dangerous, where, your function you can have a big if block, and, say you could just pass this function a value, 1, 2, or 3. When you pass in 1, you could get back 1 value. When you pass in 2, you could get back a list. And when you pass in 3, you could get back, the none type. So, there's stuff to watch out for, because in Python, you have to know, given a function's documentation, what type of object it's going to return. Otherwise, you're like a fish out of water. You don't know what the hell's going on. Whereas in a compiled language, you always know the type of the object that you're going to be getting back. So, little differences here and there. I guess it's really eye of the beholder, which one you like better.
On this whole subject of returning values, I have to say of all the languages that I'm currently using, one of my favorite is actually C# from Microsoft, which has all the functionality you were talking about before about lists and about strings, and it also does all the base types too. I was talking about with the reflection.
Yep.
But at the same time, everything is strongly typed, so you're never going to get back unexpected gobbledygook from a function unless you specifically state, I'm going to return unexpected gobbledygook from this function. So.
Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about in Python was the lambda functions.
Ooh,
and I thought I would touch on them because I said the only thing I had really trouble with was tuples and lists and the immutability. But the lambda concept, in principle, is pretty easy, and actually in any way is pretty easy. But it was the type of thing that I had trouble with. Say you set up a menu in a business application, and you set up some menu, and you just set up a timer, and you say a metronome, and you say beep every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, or 15 seconds. And, you could just hard code that into 3 function calls to add the menu. But usually you want to do that type of thing with a for loop, right? So I'd be setting up the for loop, and I'd say, set up menu, add item, tick every I seconds, and then on click, and then I'd want to pass the integer as a parameter to the function, but I wasn't able to figure out how, and that's where you use the lambda functions. I guess I would talk about it like you don't know what they are. I don't know how familiar they are to people. I didn't know what they were. But they're just inline functions, and instead of having to go and set up. You explain it.
It's the new thing in programming fads, which I think is actually really great. It's called functional programming, where what you can do is sort of put in a function within code. And so if you wanted to do something like something common might be a database query, where you want to select all the items that have a price less than 50, instead of creating a function that loops through all the items and sorts them by price, what you can do is create a simple lambda expression that says for each item, return less than 50 cents.
They're useful. So pretty much, if you're interested in lambda stuff, just go look it up on Google or Wikipedia. There's a million subjects on it. The thing to know is that Python lets you use lambda functions. I'm sure anybody looking at lambda stuff will get confused at first, and in a podcast is not the place to dictate how it's supposed to happen. But it's there, and Python can do it.
Edit
that
out.
Yeah, there's a
There's
a whole bunch of Python for you. So I think the main thing to take away from it is that one, you can make games with it, which I think we can all agree on, and two, it's pretty easy to pick up, and if you're starting out and want to whip something up, or even if you want to do prototyping, it's definitely useful for that. It's just very easy to make something functional and useful, whereas if you want to do the same kind of thing in C or C++ or some other compiled language like Java or whatever, you got to take a lot more time building up infrastructure and getting this stuff working and munging your strings together and foobar baz, whatever. So yeah, Python's out there. Look at it, use it, etc. I think we're done. It's kind of like beating a dead horse at this point. We're back, and it's time for Juicy Tidbits. The question for today is going to be, what is your favorite video game weapon and why? Mike, what's your favorite weapon? Go.
If I'm being serious, I'd have to go with right now the giant mushroom in Mario Kart. You get the giant mushroom, and you hit your use item button, and you become very large, just like Deus Ex looms large in my memory. And then you go and you run people over, and you squish them. And it's pretty cool.
Nice. Kate?
I like the bombs from Metroid because not only are they good weapons, but you can use them as a strategy to get into new places. I mean, it's only a shame, it's a crying shame actually, that they didn't have a similar system in Deus Ex.
I agree, Deus Ex heartedly.
Alright, my favorite video game weapon is from Soul Calibur. There's this character, Ivy, who has a sword, which can also turn into a whip, and for some reason I think it's really cool. Every time I see it, I think it's nice. There's no other reason than I think it's cool.
Sword whip?
It's like a sword whip. It's like, it can be a sword, and then you can change it into a chain whip with pieces of blade on it. I bet you don't see that in Deus Ex. Anyway.
talking about that.
That's it for Juicy Tidbits.
They should have had it in Deus Ex.
They
could have.
Enough of that. That's it for Juicy Tidbits. That wraps up episode 9. Only 2 topics today, but what are you going to do? Anyhow, we'll see you next month. On behalf of Mike and Kate, I'm your host, Jay. We're out. GDR. And we're back. Now, it's time for Deus Ex. Mike Doty, what's your favorite Deus Ex?
Deus Ex? Hey, Kate, what's your favorite game that starts with JS and ends with X?
Deus Ex 2.
Was there a second one?
Yeah, it wasn't the first one.
Do you get to see the guy's twin brother drinking a Coke and looking at the soda machine? Is it just so atmospheric you might cry?
No. The second one wasn't nearly as atmospheric. It was really sad.
There were no soda machines.
Deus Ex!
How could a Deus Ex without soda machines be nearly as good as the first?
You just walk into the building and it's just like a building that's people doing stuff, Mike. Oh God, I'm so sorry. All right, we'll really do Juicy Tidbits now. Here we go.
Fine, you lost my input.
No, you need to do a Juicy Tidbit. End of story. So just hold on a second.
So wait, how long are the Juicy Tidbits supposed to be?
Like 30 seconds. None of this oh man, Deus Ex, it was so good. You walk into the building and you see this guy looking at the Coke and he's got the newspaper and it's just a great experience and I just have no emotional reaction to Deus Ex.
Dude,
I'm just talking about it.
A lot more emotion.
Alright, just shut up. Okay. What is your favorite video game weapon and why? Go, Mike.
Well, you just walk into the room and you look at the guy and he's got the soda and you walk up to him and he says, what's your favorite game? He says, Super Mario Galaxy.
All right, Kate, what have you got?
Oh man, Deus Ex.
Man, didn't you love that scene where you walk in and he's at the soda machine?
Oh my God. Kate's favorite weapon is Deus Ex. Cool. No, do you really have it?
You can.
You know what game really could have benefited from tortoise shells?
What? Deus Ex.
Yes!
You and your friggin' Deus Ex, man. Alright.
Wait, do you
Listen, no, stop! I get to do my Juicy Tidbit! You don't get to take over my Juicy Tidbit time!
Biggest emotion.
No! My favorite video game weapon. Listen, stop interrupting me. Why don't you go play Super Mario Deus Ex Galaxy Kart and, you know...
Game Developers Refuge.
Hold on. What? Yeah. I'm busy. Sorry. I was interrupted by a rude knocking at my door.
That's great.
Anyway,
Sorry, my cat.
Should I punch myself now? Jeez, man.
I gave the monkey a gun.
All right.
I'd given the monkey a gun